Welcome back to Askewed Reviews, and we are continuing the Friday the 13th series with the 1986 film Friday the 13th, Part 6 Jason Lives. Here is your trivia question for today. What is the new name of the town and camp of Crystal Lake? The answer will be at the end of this video. So, with this film, it's not clearly defined how much longer it is since the last movie, but we still have Tommy Jarvis, although he looks a little different this time around. So, Tommy and a friend of his have recently been released from a mental institution, as they are now cleared. But Tommy is under the belief that Jason is not actually dead. It's been a few years, but he still believes that he's going to come back. So, he and his friend go to the grave of Jason and dig him up. The two of them do end up finding Jason's dead body, but Tommy still wants a bit of revenge. So he takes a metal post and begins stabbing and impaling the dead body. Unfortunately, lightning strikes and brings Jason back to life. So Tommy runs off for help. He heads to the local police station, but of course his story sounds completely false. Sheriff Garris does not believe Tommy's story whatsoever, so eventually he does release him. Now, unfortunately for the people of Crystal Lake, Jason is back and cutting a swath through all the people of the town. Now, unfortunately for Tommy, as no one believes that Jason is actually back, he is the number one suspect, so he gets dragged back in and put back in jail. So the sheriff's daughter Megan ends up taking a bit of a shine towards Tommy and ends up releasing him as she believes him. It seems that Jason is making his way back to Camp Crystal Lake, and the big issue with that is there are now kids there as camp is in session. So who will win in the final confrontation between Tommy Jarvis and Jason Voorhees? Danny Steinman, who directed the last film, was also set to be the director for this one, with Tom McLaughlin as the writer. The producers, however, pushed for the studios to put McLaughlin in as the writer and the director. Now, this wasn't only because the producers didn't like Steinman, but also because of McLaughlin's work on the movie One Dark Night. This movie was yet again another Friday the 13th that had a fake working title that was also a David Bowie song. This one was called Aladdin Sane. Although the character of Tommy Jarvis has been played by three different actors, the character has actually appeared in more Friday the 13ths than any other protagonist. Also, this is the last film with Tommy Jarvis in it, which is why the next one is called The New Blood. John Shepard was asked to come back and reprise his role of Tommy. He declined, though, as he had recently become a born again Christian and just felt this was not the right thing for him to do. Melanie Kinnaman, who played Pam in the last film, was actually signed on to reprise her role, but then they decided to go in a different direction and cut the character out. However, though, there is a part of Pam that does make an appearance in this movie, as Tommy is driving the same pickup truck from the last film that belonged to Pam. There were also plans of bringing Shavar Ross back as the character of Reggie, but he ended up declining when he found out that the character was going to be killed off. Tom Matthews, who takes over the role of Tommy Jarvis in this film, was primarily hired on due to his performance in The Return of the Living Dead. Dan Bradley was originally the actor brought on to play Jason in the film. Now, some of his scenes can still be watched as he's the one who's Jason during the paintball sequence. Unfortunately, after seeing these scenes, the studio asked that they recast Jason as they felt that the actor was too bulky. So that's when CJ Graham was brought in to take over, and he played Jason for all the rest of the scenes. Jennifer Cook was brought on to play the character of Megan, primarily due to her performance on the miniseries V. Ron Palillo cameoed as the character Hawes, but you probably know him better as the character of Horshack from the television series Welcome Back, Kotter. Nancy McLaughlin, who played the character of Lizbeth, was actually the director's wife and almost died twice during filming. At one point, the trajectory of a spear like implement flew through the glass and was supposed to miss her, but the windshield almost caused it to go directly into her head. Also, the scene where she's underwater in the puddle, there is a tube that's supposed to give her oxygen, but that kept getting filled with mud, so she just had to hold her breath during the scene. There was a theory that this girl Nancy from the film would grow up to be Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street, But the director, Tom McLaughlin, stated that this is not true, and the character is named after his wife, Nancy. There are apparently quite a few horror movie references throughout this film. For instance, Megan mentions Cunningham Road, a reference to Sean S. Cunningham, the director of the first film. Tommy mentions a grocery store called Karloff's, named for Boris Karloff. Sheriff Garris mentions a town called Carpenter, named after director John Carpenter. The character Sissy is more than likely named after Sissy Spacek from Carrie. Sissy also wears a jacket with the name Baker on it, which is either a reference towards Angela Baker from Sleepaway Camp or the special effects master Rick Baker. Kevin Williamson has stated that this film is what inspired him to write Scream. In fact, he even offered Tom McLaughlin the opportunity to direct, but he ended up declining. Did you happen to notice near the beginning of this film that they parodied James Bond? So the same Bowie knife that ends up in Cort's head is the same one from Rambo First Blood Part 2. Here's some interesting things about Jason in this film. For instance, the director decided to have it where he does not harm children due to his sympathy for what he went through as a child himself. But then again, how do you explain him then going after Tommy in the first place from the fourth movie? This film would actually be the first time that Jason would ever be shot at. The scene where Jason is getting hit in the face by the boat motor was actually filmed in McLaughlin's parents' pool. Apparently, some of the fake guts actually caused their filtration system to break. They decided to record the RV tipping and skidding as the last scene, as they were worried CJ Graham could get severely injured. It's unclear as to why he was in the RV in the first place, as Jason is not seen until he actually climbs out of the RV. This is the only Friday the 13th movie to not have nudity, and that's primarily due to Darcy DeMoss, who refused to do a nude scene due to the harassment she received while auditioning for the last movie. In the original script, there was an alternate ending where we would be back at Jason's grave. Martin would actually be alive this time, and there would be an elderly man that he'd be talking to, which would turn out to be Elias Voorhees, Jason's father. Apparently, this scene would have helped explain away why in the last film they talked about cremating Jason, as apparently Elias would have been the one to have paid for the grave. But apparently, the studio felt it would have been way too confusing and they didn't want to put a backstory into the next film about Elias. The body count for this film is 18. Alan Howes, who gets his heart torn out by Jason, Darren, who gets speared in the stomach with a fence post, Lisbeth, who also gets speared by a fence post and then drowned in a puddle, Bert, who gets his face smashed against a tree, Stan, Katie, and Larry, all who get decapitated with a machete all together, Martin, who gets impaled with a glass bottle to the throat, Stephen and Annette, who both get impaled through the chest with a machete while trying to drive away on a scooter, Nikki, whose face gets smashed through a mirror and then into the side of an RV, Court, who gets stabbed in the head with a hunting knife while driving the RV, Roy, who is found dismembered, Sissy, who gets her head twisted off, Paula, who assumedly gets completely hacked up as the next time we see her room is just covered in blood, Officer Thornton, who gets a knife or dart thrown into his head, Officer Pappas, who gets his head crushed, and Sheriff Garris, who literally gets folded in half. So when it comes to the film Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives, this is another one of my favorite films from this series. I really liked that they brought in Jason as more of a supernatural creature this time around. So I'm going to give this movie a 4 out of 5. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode, what is the new name of the town and camp of Crystal Lake? So, in an attempt to distance everything from Jason, they rename it Forest Green instead of Crystal Lake. However, though, this is the only film that does so. They always still call it Crystal Lake in the movies before or after this one. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. And if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.